there was more research dedicated to matrescence and all of the changes that take place.
Yeah.
Imagine if there was more education around it so that people knew that their life was going to change and that we didn't perpetuate this myth about just bouncing back and your baby just joining you and you being the same as you always were. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to No Place Like Home.
Hi.
I'm Jess, and this is Larissa.
Hello.
And today we are going to talk about one of my favourite topics, matrescence.
I'm so excited because I only discovered this word, let alone meaning, not too long ago.
I mean, I actually, when we were preparing for this episode, I was trying to think when I first heard the word. I definitely had never heard of it when I had Louis. I can't figure out if it was when I was pregnant with Jude or if it was when I became a doula and I was all of a sudden, you know, all these doula Instagrams popping up all the time, if I heard of it then. But it's definitely a newish word. I mean, it was coined by Dana Raphael back in the 70s, but it kind of went dormant and then was repopularized more recently.
Yeah, I feel like now, I mean, particularly because once you get into that sort of doula world and postpartum world, it's a very used term.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, I'm so glad that we've got an opportunity to talk about this today because we talk about it in Life After Birth, but there's a page dedicated to it and I could honestly write a whole book on matrescence. So just for anyone who's listening that doesn't know what matrescence means, I'm going to read you something from my book, Life After Birth. So the term matrescence was coined by anthropologist Dana Raphael to describe the journey from maiden to mother. It can be used to define all the changes, neurological, physical, emotional, hormonal, spiritual, and social, that come with the growing and birthing of a baby. Similar in intensity to adolescence, which is the transition from childhood to adulthood, but with far less support and social understanding, matrescence is a rite of passage that often propels us into a journey of self-discovery that can be beautiful, painful, and healing. Not only do we find ourselves in a newfound state of vulnerability after we give birth, but with a burning desire to provide the best version of ourselves to our children, and with this comes a new sense of identity that leaves us wondering where we belong in society. It is likened to a fracturing of the soul, and it affects every fibre of our being, changing our relationship with the rest of the world forever. So, I mean, there's a little bit more, but I'll stop there. I mean, that's just, anyone listening who's a mum knows becoming a parent is so epic and it changes everything.
But even just listening to that, like, I was just thinking to myself then, like, how did I not know enough about the postpartum period?
I know.
Like it still is relevant, you know, when we were talking to you, Fern, about how the postpartum section of all these baby expos and pregnancy expos just doesn't really get a look in and everyone's like, oh, what is that? So it is still very much an unknown area.
And I mean, you said yourself in our episode when we spoke about your postpartum experiences that you thought you'd be the same person after you had Valentina.
Yeah, I thought 100%. I just thought I'll be the same person, but just with a child.
Yeah. I mean, we all think that, right? And, you know, we're not even, I mean, look, I'm going to read something else from Life After Birth because what I'd really love to do now is sort of hash over some of those points that were raised when I spoke about what matrescence is. So the first one being neurological, because we go through immense neurological changes when we are pregnant, and it's only recently that they've found out that neuroplasticity is a thing in pregnancy and postpartum. And
I only realised this when I'm through my doula course, and Julia Jones was talking about the analogy of having a handbag and unpacking the handbag.
Emptying all the contents out and only putting back in what matters. And it's likened to a neurological fine-tuning, which our brain actually shrinks, but it's doing that to make us more intuitive to our babies, to be able to know what they need. So what we say in life after birth is, you know, there's the obvious physical changes of being pregnant, but not only are your organs shifting and belly expanding to make way for new life growing inside you, but your brain is also under the influence of a strong cocktail of hormones, hello, estrogen, progesterone, and oxytocin, and neurological changes that make growing, birthing, and feeding that life possible. As your pregnancy progresses, you may become forgetful, not only about where you put your keys or how to do simple algebra, but also about passwords and pins as well. Society trivializes these changes. You know, there's that whole
Baby brain.
baby brain.
Yeah.
But like the physical changes we undergo in pregnancy, they are part of our divine human design, a neurological fine-tuning that is priming us to protect our baby and be the best mothers we can be. After all, this is as important for the survival and well-being of our species as pregnancy and birth itself. They now know that you can look at an MRI scan of someone's brain and know whether or not they've given birth, just because of the way grey matter presents in the MRI.
Amazing.
I mean, yeah.
So that is that for those people that don't know what neuroplasticity. I'm having a philanthropic moment like you. Neuroplasticity is. What's a really kind of concise way?
Okay, so there's a great quote in our book from Renee White, who's an amazing doula. She has a doula collective called Fill Your Cup, and she's got a few products and things as well. So what Renee says is, while your overall brain size is significantly reduced, particular regions of your brain increase. From the moment of placental implantation, a mama's brain begins to modify crucial regions responsible for the maternal circuitry, including modifications to reduce maternal stress, anxiety, fear, and increase nesting and the protection of our babies. Throughout pregnancy, your brain is evolving and triaging cognitive functions in preparation for the birth of your child. Research shows that while there is a fogginess in the first few weeks of postpartum, your brain is effectively leveling up from novice to expert in your new baby game. Never fear, the feelings are transient and give way to improved cognitive functions. Every time you're pregnant, your brain undergoes this process again, essentially leveling you up to genius. So we used to think that your brain was only, you know, it was that first 3 years of someone's life where your brain is able to change. And we now know that brains also change in pregnancy and many other times of your life as well.
Absolutely.
And I just think, you know, we can't really talk about matrescence without talking about the patriarchy, because I know there'll probably be some people that are rolling their eyes, but when you look at the fact that we're only just hearing this word, you know, relatively, it's relatively new to our vernacular. When I was writing Life After Birth, it was showing up as a spelling mistake every time I wrote the word matrescence. That's how unknown that word is. And yet it is something that affects every single person that has a baby. Even if you have a wonderful experience and the best postpartum and you love motherhood and you're so supported, it's still a huge change. And it's just not recognised. And for the people that have a horrible time, imagine if there was more research dedicated to matrescence and all of the changes that take place.
Yeah.
Imagine if there was more education around it so that people knew that their life was going to change, and that we didn't perpetuate this myth about just bouncing back and your baby just joining you and you being the same as you always were.
But change, it's just to go back to your point that, you know, the education around your life will change, right? Because I'm sure some people listening will go, well, of course we knew our life was going to change. We're having a baby, but the change is pertinent to you as the woman.
Yeah.
Not, of course, my life's going to change because I've got a child.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's funny when you look at even, you know, when a baby is born, so is a mother, right? Like we know this, but yet society just looks at the baby, oh, a baby's been born. No one would ever say, oh, a mother has been born. And yet it's so obvious when you know. And so, coming back to the patriarchy, there's not enough money being put. Like, who's deciding where the money goes for studies into this stuff? First of all, there's not enough money anyway. Second of all, the people who are deciding where the money goes are
Is
men.
there even any studies into
Well, no, but that's the
matrescence?
thing. So when you look at the pool of money that goes towards scientific studies, the people who are deciding where that money goes
Yeah.
and the people that are doing the studies, they're all men. And the tricky thing is that often once you're in it, maybe the scientists that want to actually be researching it are also the least resourced to be able to do so because they're also mums.
Yeah, very true.
So, but anyway, I won't harp on about the patriarchy too much, but I think it's very telling that we had a drug for limp dicks before we knew what matrescence meant.
So true. Good old Viagra was there. We had to solve that problem.
And it's just, I mean, people always say that if men had to experience pregnancy and postpartum, that we would have Medicare funded.
It would be Medicare funded.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't exist.
Yeah. So another big part of matrescence is the physical changes. And look, it can go both ways. I know a lot of people feel it's like you develop this awe for your body and you stop worrying about like, oh, that little roll there or that slightly bigger thigh there. It's just because you realize what your body's capable of and you see that it's such a miracle that we grow and birth these babies. But there's also the societal expectation that once you've had your baby, you should just be, back in the same jeans, looking the same. And it's almost like, there's that hashtag goddess if you're pregnant.
Yeah.
But it's only when the baby's in your belly. As soon as that baby's in your arms, you're not a goddess anymore. And especially not if that belly hasn't gone back into place.
Mine hasn't gone back nearly 11 years after. But I still think I'm a goddess.
You are a goddess.
Why not?
And, there's also, look, with the birth trauma inquiry that's happening at the moment, there is more conversation happening around this, but there's a lot of people that suffer from birth trauma, birth injuries, and nobody wants to hear about that. You don't, and there's only very few people who even understand, and they're the ones that have been through it too. And so often, there's people that go for years with a prolapse or, can't have intercourse without immense pain because of a tear or a stitch or an episiotomy that's been, put back together the wrong way. And it's just shocking that we have to deal with this often in silence because it's not normalized because people don't know that it's happening to so many people. And so we suffer in silence, much like you did when you had your Valentina.
Because we're, like I think I've said before, we're coming dangerously close to normalizing all of these things as just being part of what a woman experiences through birth.
So
the emotional matrescence and the emotional.
I mean, the emotional side is huge, right? Like there's the postpartum hormonal drop. I think most people would know about that, on sort of day three or four, all those hormones that your body produced in order to birth your baby come crashing down and people can feel quite weepy. And it can be common to have baby blues in sort of the first month after you have your baby. But postpartum or perinatal anxiety and mood disorders are huge. There's apparently 1 in 4 women who suffer extreme symptoms of depression and anxiety in their postpartum. And most people, if they're diagnosed with postpartum depression, it's when their firstborn child is 4.
Yeah.
So it's taking that long. But your stats, we spoke about your stats recently. Your stats also show that
78% of women experienced symptoms of that similar to, postnatal depression and anxiety.
And, it's just, I sometimes wonder, and this is a conversation amongst doulas, if we knew what matrescence was, if we knew about the changes that come, if we were supported, would the rates of depression and anxiety be so high? It's hard to say, but, it's because sometimes just understanding what you're going through makes
Is the
it so
permission
much
slip.
easier.
Yeah, for it to be easier.
Yeah.
And that's, because a lot of people will talk about all of this, but it's like, well, okay, what can we do? How do we get this education? Where does it start?
I mean, I tried writing a book about it, but as we discussed, you people until you've had your baby, you're still so focused on the birth, and
That's
it's
why
often
we're going to do the postpartum
yeah.
expo.
yeah. And also just like tying into the emotional side of things is maternal rage. It's a thing.
Oh yeah.
It's so stigmatized, although that's changing slowly. A lot of people feel immense shame over their rage because they weren't angry people in the past, and all of a sudden they find themselves going from 0 to 100 over something seemingly really sort of insignificant. And look, I do definitely think we should have a whole podcast episode about this.
Interestingly, so I did Lael Stone's parenting immersion course, which for any parent out there, it is phenomenal, that course. It literally changed my whole dynamic of my family. But in that course, she talks about mum rage.
And it's always a sign of unmet needs, right? Like we don't just wake up and decide to be angry. It's almost like, do you know how goldfish, if there's no oxygen in their tanks, they jump out of the tank? And do you know about this?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So it's almost, maybe it's not the same thing, but it's almost like we're just so like,
we need to jump out of our tank. Yeah.
And if we can look at rage and anger as a way of, well, there's two things. It's identifying our triggers, because sometimes we don't know until we have young children what our triggers are, and also seeing it as a sign that we have needs that aren't being met and that something needs to change. Yeah. If we could reframe rage in that way, I think we would have a lot of very positive change in society.
Yeah, I feel like the triggers is a big thing, because if you're not, I don't know, if you're not like attuned to why am I feeling like this, how do you even get to that place of awareness?
And again, it comes back to education, right? And there are there's a really wonderful free course. It's family planning systems or something like that. There are resources out there. Like it doesn't have to be a course that you pay for, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It's still time to be learning about this stuff, but it's also, there needs to be more education and information on a ground level. Like this is the stuff that should be being taught in hospitals and by the midwives and the obstetricians.
But we're just getting it later.
Yeah.
I feel like the aware parenting movement is, and theory is just amazing, and that really did change. But what that essentially is about is understanding ourselves before then we can parent, right? So you go through, what are my triggers?
And a lot of people don't fully know themselves until they become parents either. So it's all good and well to say, do this course before you have a baby. But it's like, how many things do we want people to do before they have a baby? Yeah. They also have to do their hypnobirthing course and their birth course and their this and their that. We're asking a lot. Yeah. And I also just think, coming back to the village, it's like we don't have that village around us anymore. And so we don't see the things that it's not normalized.
Yeah. The social aspects of matrescence.
Oh, wow. I think this is so big. Again, we could dedicate a whole episode to this. So I think an especially big one is when you're the first person in your friendship group to have a baby. It's just we are at our core, we are egotistical beings. So it's very difficult for someone who's, especially if you're a young mum, or if, you have a baby when all of your friends are in a very different phase to you, as supportive as they want to be, it's very rare that they really know how to support you. So one of my best friends had a baby when we were quite young, and I then apologized to her when I had Louis for being such a shit friend, because I thought I was being supportive and I actually had no idea how to support her. And she pulled me up on it a couple of times. You know, she was like, if you say you're going to do something, you can't wait for me to confirm it with you. You just have to, be a woman of your word, because I'm too busy to pick up my phone and confirm that you're going to come and help me move house. And, just I once I had Louis, I looked at the way I was a friend to Bianca and I just felt so bad. And she understands, she knows that I didn't get it. But I was the mother hen of the group. I was the one, so if even the mother hen who looks after all their friends, who does everything for everyone, even I didn't know how to support my friend who had a baby. So other friends just have no idea. And it can be so, so isolating.
Yeah.
And then there's also, even if you have a friend, a baby at the same time as your best friend, it doesn't guarantee it's going to bring you closer. Some people find that there's, either competition and jealousy in friendship groups, or that you find that there's fundamental differences in the way that
points of view, belief systems.
And some of them don't, you don't really think about parenting styles until you're a parent, right? And so if you find yourself at odds with your friends or your best friends, it can be a really, really tricky time. But the other side of that, and something I think is really important to talk about, is the wonderful friendships that come from being a mother as well.
Yeah.
When you have that common ground, that shared that shared experience, you find yourself becoming closer with people who either you've never met or who you sort of might have known from work, or you were friends at high school but you've drifted. And I think that's really beautiful as well. And that's why Matrescence, I think all of the difficult parts of parenthood have always been pathologized. So they've been, looked at as being something wrong.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of beauty there as well. And so by learning about Matrescence and learning about all the changes that happen, we can also figure out where the beauty is and use that.
Because I feel like we're missing that, right? Like it feels like that there's not a lot of beauty for women in the after anymore. And I think that's part of this. We just don't have any education or any knowing of the beauty that can come after, because all we really hear about is, oh, well, good luck with your sleep. And
it's all very negative.
It's all very negative, right?
Or it's like, God forbid you're honest. It's so tricky. And I think also in that in the social aspect of Matrescence, there's also that fear of judgment. I know that you told your story about Mother's Group and you had bleeding nipples, and yet you were so afraid of being judged.
So what the interesting thing is about that is that there was actually no judgment.
No, that's the thing.
Was within
it was
me.
all in you, yeah.
And interestingly, since I shared my postpartum experience, I've actually had 3 women from my mother's group reach out to me, and I feel like I'm going to get emotional. But they reached out to me and they actually said, I'm really sorry. And I actually felt really bad for them, because I still felt like I had, somehow I didn't want to transfer blame in telling my story.
Yeah.
So I think it just opened my eyes to, still after all these years, it still affects other women.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know.
Honey.
I got so emotional. But yeah, I think going through this as well has been, it's just opened up so many doors, and so many women have been reaching out with their stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so hard. And
It is.
This is why it's so important that we're doing what we're doing, right? This is why it's so important that we've got this podcast, so that we can create a space to educate and normalize these huge changes that mums go through, and also to hear about other people's experiences and you know and then eventually we're going to have home where people can come and stay and be
Yeah.
supported, and just for things to be normalized a little bit.
Yeah, and there's still so much after the fact. We as women experience these things, and then there's still beauty after it all, right? Like my mother's group, we were really close after we all had our children, and then it kind of spurts off, and there were four of us that kind of stayed in close contact. And then as the kids get older, you kind of, they go to different schools, you have different things and interests. But I think just having some of them come back to me with like, I'm sorry, I had no idea this was going on. But like, then we'll have discussions about, your face was really good because I had no idea.
Yeah. Good poker face.
Good poker face, right? And I'm usually very expressive,
Yeah. Yeah, but that just shows how afraid you were of judgment. The fact that you could put a poker face on through that toe curling pain of breastfeeding just shows how important it was for you to have this facade of thriving through motherhood up.
Yeah. And the
because you
amount
didn't
of
want to look like
women
a
just
failure.
after these, listening to our episodes, which I'm so grateful for, just still hearing women's stories, like, it just keeps reigniting that fire. Not that it ever goes out, but, it's just, we will just keep driving and pushing.
Before we wrap up, I do just want to quickly touch on the economics
Yeah,
side
yeah,
of
yeah.
matrescence, because it's not something that we list in all those things we talk about in life after birth. It's not listed, but I think it's really important because I don't know many people who have a baby without at least a small loss of income. Usually people are working, if you want to take a year off, you do it at half pay. If you're lucky enough to work somewhere that gives you full, 6 months of maternity leave. And that loss of income can make people feel really adrift. And, it's another area where we're losing control.
Yeah.
And there's also the fact that, so many people end up being a stay-at-home mum for years and years and years. No one's paying us superannuation in that time.
No.
And I don't think that this is something that people are thinking about when they're in the depths of motherhood and, they've just had a baby and they're like, what the my life has been flipped on its head.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that, matrescence, postpartum, it's all forever. And yeah, you go through changes when you have your baby, but then also for each phase of parenthood, there's struggles and challenges and also wonderful parts.
Yeah.
Your kids are getting older and you said earlier, they need you more than ever. And it's just really, I think, important to talk about, again, probably in its own episode, that homelessness is very prevalent in women because we don't have superannuation paid for years and years and years. And then if you separate from your partner and you don't have a good lawyer, you've got nothing.
Yep.
You've got no super. And I just think there's something fundamentally wrong with our government if that's something we have to deal with. I just think that if you're a stay-at-home mum, the government should be paying superannuation. But again, that's a bit of a tangent. I probably shouldn't be bringing that into this
I could
conversation
go on
right
about
now.
my taxing women tangent and all the rest of it. But I think that was beautiful. Jess, thank you.
There's just one last thing that I want to. Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
It's just so there's a study that is it talks about how the increased mental load of motherhood possibly benefits our brains in the long term, because even though we feel overwhelmed and foggy and all of those things in the first few years, the long-term effects of that are that it's strengthening our brains. And so these are, nothing's been proven yet, and I think it's a lifetime study to really show whether or not that's accurate, but I think it's really interesting to ponder. And I just want to read so I read over this Just as the hormonal and physical changes of adolescence prepare a person for successful adulthood, matrescence is a time where the brain and body prepare for the transition to motherhood. These two life stages are characterised by shifting social roles, with adulthood marking the social transition from dependence to independence, and motherhood marking the transition to now supporting one's own dependence. So, it's just crazy that we speak so much about adolescence. The whole world, society understands adolescence, and matrescence,
We just take for granted.
still a typo according to, any Word document that you work on. And I think it's also really important to note that this is a feminist issue. Even if you don't want children, it's so important to be talking about this and to be aware of the changes that your friends are going through when they have babies, because if you're on this fight for equality between the sexes, then this is, and you're ignoring matrescence, then you're not a feminist, in my opinion. It's so important.
Yeah, definitely. And tell us, engage with us on socials, and definitely we want to hear your thoughts and opinions and anything else you may want us to talk about on the podcast.
Yeah.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.